Good morning, everyone, and welcome. So for those who don't know Make UK, there may be a few non-members amongst you. I'll just give a quick introduction of what we do and for everyone of how we can actually help you. So as you may know already, Make UK has championed the manufacturing sector since the late 1800s, and the 18,000 manufacturing businesses we represent in the UK provide higher paid skilled jobs for 1.5 million people in the sector and are responsible for 50% of the UK's total exports, 64% of all UK business research and development, and 15% of UK total business investment. So really a very important role in the economy. And Make UK is the largest provider of HR and legal advice for employers. And we also provide extensive health and safety training as well on sustainability and net zero, and of course other topics. We also have one of the largest apprenticeship centres of the country at Aston in the Midlands. But one of our main roles is to campaign to help external stakeholders understand what manufacturing is about and how this bold and versatile sector is adapting and transforming to provide the solutions to the biggest societal challenges we face today. And it's thanks to your feedback during our regional meetings across England and Wales that, and through our surveys, that we are able to take the pulse of the entire manufacturing industry in real time. And we bring that precious information back to government and departments so that they can make more informed decisions. But there's always a lot to do, and we are currently fighting hard to get an industrial strategy back on the official agenda to soften the costs of doing business, which includes energy, raw materials and employment, and the challenging business tax environment. But we have had some major wins with the introduction of the Energy Bill Relief Scheme last year, T-levels, and more recently the full expensing of capital investment and the revision of the retained EU law bill just very recently. On the net zero front, we've been actively supporting the formation of the Net Zero Council, which has just been recently formed. It's co-chaired by the Energy Minister Graham Stewart and will enable a better collaboration with business and finance leaders to drive forward industry's transition to net zero. So today we're focusing on funding, and more specifically on funding for net zero and sustainability, and for on energy. COVID taught us that businesses need to be a lot more resilient to public health events and supply chain disruptions. And now, in our very geopolitical uncertain post-Brexit and European war era, we're actually battling a cost of doing business crisis. And the big questions on energy are about pricing and long-term supply. All the while, climate impacts and the collapse of biodiversity are being felt more and more across the world in our country. And we also need to take those into account when we evaluate business risk. The transition to a sustainable, low carbon and more energy independent economy has to take place, which brings us exciting opportunities, of course, and advantages, but it's also extraordinarily challenging in this context. So Make UK is committed to helping you in your transition to net zero. And in 2022, we released, with the help of experts from Inspired, the roadmap to net zero for our sector. And we have committed, as per the government strategy and the Climate Change Committee's recommendations, to reduce our emissions by 68% compared to 2018 levels by 2035. And to achieve this, that means we need to roughly halve our emissions by the end of this decade. And it's been skills, and now labor as well, and also where to find information on how to get going, along with finding the money to invest, which have been the main barriers to progress. So it's not easy to know how to manage and pay for your energy costs, nor how to fund your net zero journey. So today, our experts, Georgina from Inspired and Sandy from Physiative, and Martin Elliker, our health and safety and sustainability consultant, will be able to help you with this. But before we start, I'd just like to initiate a quick snap poll to gauge where we're at on our net zero's journey. So please answer if you can or want these questions.
So yeah, there are 3 questions in total. The first one is just for us to get an idea of where you are on your road to net zero, your journey to net zero. And then also the second question is just to see if the current financial difficulties, the current cost of doing business, has an impact on the progress of that, and then the reasons behind it. Good morning to those who just joined us. We've had some introductions just now. We've gone into a quick poll just to ascertain whereabouts delegates are on their road to net zero.
I think we've got just about everyone answered. So, oh, maybe not. Yeah, roughly. So,
people can see.
Sorry. Oh, yes.
Do you want to talk through the results, Bridget?
Yeah. So yes, I will. Can you see now the results? Yes. So yeah, so it's good news that most people have started actually, which is good. So they've got a strategy and started to implement it, but actually almost half, 46% need support. So that's good. That's, yeah, quite significant still, but it's good progress. And I'm quite reassured that only, less than 20% haven't started, which is a really good sign. And 8% seem to be really well on track. 8 and 12, that's nearly 20%. So pretty good results. So well done. I'm quite happy with that. That now, actually, the important question as well is whether if you have a strategy in place, has progressing your net zero strategy or plan taken a backseat due to the current cost of doing business crisis? And that's interesting and not surprising, really, that almost 60% have said yes. And then I don't know why 20% have said not applicable, probably because you don't have a strategy. Yeah, I'm surmising. And then the second one is why, as to why it has taken a backseat. So interesting. Yeah, it's both mainly, well, 4/3, it's both skills and lack of funding or difficulty to get funding, and then not applicable in 40% of cases. So interesting results, but not surprising. These two, skills and funding, as I said before, are always leading, the main barriers, and they alternate. So before the crisis, it was skills, and now it's more funding, but yeah, apparently still skills. So anyway, that's it. I will stop now. But thank you very much. Very interesting results and encouraging as well.
Right, so over to Georgina.
Thank you very much, Annette, and good morning, everybody, members of Make UK. I'm really happy to be with you this morning. I'm going to take you through kind of a bit of what's happening in the energy landscape, a bit of the big picture policy stuff, and then touch on funding and ways that you might want to look at to try and control energy costs a little. Now, before I sort of start, I will confess that we agreed the topic for this back in January, February, and decided to host it in May in the hopes that a lot of things that are kind of in the government pipeline, we would have more clarity on sort of post the budget and the new fiscal year. That hasn't happened. So there's actually not a great amount of funding for me to talk about. However, I'm very happy to take questions as we go through. We'll look at sort of some of the other things that are going to impact you. And like I said, ways that you might want to consider looking at things like cost stabilisation for your business. So hopefully on the screens now you can see my slides. I'm very happy to take questions as we go along. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat. I've got that on a second screen next to me. So if you do think of something, please do submit it in the chat. We'll try and discuss it on the webinar, but do also take advantage of us being here. Get in touch afterwards or get in touch with Make UK if there's anything that you want to find out more after we've touched on it this morning. So I said I'd start off with a little bit of big picture, and I think it's important to kind of put things into sort of, context, what's happening and why. So I think there's no kind of doubt, hopefully, in anyone's mind that climate change is real, the climate crisis is here. And we need to address that as a sector and as a nation. And even if you are still a little bit dubious about climate change, it is undeniable that fossil fuels are a finite resource. There's only so much of it available. And we need to look at other ways of making energy and electricity and doing business if we want to be economically sustainable. So the government has kind of three challenges that it needs to meet as part of the clean energy transition. Firstly, we need to take existing generation and consumption away from unabated fossil fuels. So that includes things like putting in carbon capture and storage for existing generation, things like fuel switching, moving from natural gas over to hydrogen, and the government sees that industry and the manufacturing sector is going to play a really important part in that. They're also trying to build new clean generation, and there is a cost to that. And the final kind of part of these this trilemma is reducing how much energy we need in the first place. And that's not just reducing overall consumption, it's also looking at matching supply and demand so that we've got that flow across the grid working favorably rather than having kind of peaks and troughs. If we get any of these three wrong from a policy perspective, it's going to lead to a huge amount of volatility in the market. And we saw a snapshot of this last year when global gas supplies were put under pressure because the UK and the EU both made a statement that they were moving away from Russian gas. And the cost impacts of that are quite horrific. If we look at kind of what's happened in the gas markets over the past year, the good news is that, as you can see from the graph in the bottom left-hand side, the prices are actually now back to kind of a more reasonable level. Now, I wouldn't get complacent about this. I am not a trader, so I can't answer questions on kind of wholesale market fundamentals, but I can take the questions and ask a colleague to get in touch, who's much more knowledgeable on the wholesale aspects than I am. But what I do know is that there's a lot of commentators kind of looking at the bigger picture, the amount of gas storage that we have, and kind of long range weather forecasts, and predicting that actually this coming winter is likely to be as challenging, if not more so, than last winter. So for anyone that kind of hasn't looked at your gas contracts, electricity contracts for a while, we would recommend you talk to an expert, Inspired or somebody else, about what's happening in the markets, and making sure you're sort of planning your procurement strategy around that. The electricity market has a very similar pattern because it tends to follow what the gas market is doing. The reason for this is that in the UK at the moment, a lot of our electricity generation is generated from gas-fired thermal power stations. This is changing, and as we see more renewables coming online, that graph that kind of matches gas to electricity starts to diverge a little, and the power markets are doing more and more of their own thing. I think it's important to kind of just mention the energy bills discount scheme. I'm not going into this in a lot of detail in this call, although happy to take questions on it if anyone has it. I know that Make UK has been communicating quite well with its members around this, and hopefully everybody that was eligible has already seen kind of relief on energy bills through since October last year. Now, the scheme that came in October ended at the end of March, and so there's a new scheme from April that you'll sort of see when your April bills come through in May, if you've not had that already. But for the manufacturing sector, for certain sort of sectors, most of which are manufacturing, the government has launched extra support. So the additional discounts are aimed at businesses that are energy and or trade intensive that have been most affected by the surge in global energy prices. You can see kind of on the screen, there is quite a big difference between kind of where the threshold is set for most businesses. So for electricity, kind of 30 pence. If you're classed as an energy or trade intensive business and you get the additional discount, the threshold kind of comes down to 18 pence. So that's a big difference, but there are limits. So the maximum discount you can get is sort of 9 pence on what you've bought. It also applies a maximum of 20% discount. So if you've been unlucky enough to get locked into a contract or to make purchases at market peak, this might not kind of be quite the reduction that you were hoping for, but it's definitely better than nothing. So do please check whether you are eligible and make sure that you are applying for it if you are. Now, I said the word apply. The last scheme happened automatically. This one does not. You do have to apply for it, and you do need an accountant or someone kind of with a similar standing to sign off to sort of say that your calculations, what you're putting forward, is correct. The discounts will be reflected in the bills from next month, so from June, but the support will be backdated to the 1st of April. Like I say, I know Make UK has already communicated with his members about this, but if you do think you are eligible, please do have a further conversation with Brigitte or myself. Now, that discount and the previous iteration of bill relief only applies to what's happening on the wholesale markets. A large part of what you pay for your energy costs is nothing to do with the wholesale markets, and that's likely to become even more muddied, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in the presentation. a significant chunk, we used to say it was around about 60% of your total bill. With wholesale costs having been so high, that has gone down, but I'd be very surprised if it's less than 40% of the bill for anybody comes from what we call the non-commodity costs, so costs that are on your bill that are not related to the commodities, gas and electricity market. And the non-commodities cover things like the cost of running the networks, so all of your network charges, and it also covers levies and charges that are placed on the bills in order to fund the move away from unabated fossil fuel and the investment into clean generation that we talked about on the first slide. So one big one of these is contracts for difference. So that is funding a lot of wind generation at the moment. Some nuclear has gone into that, some tidal. Now, interestingly, because the wholesale markets were so high last year, we can see that actually the Treasury expected that the generators would not be they would not need to claim the contracts for difference, so these would not be kind of passed on to your bills. However, that is going to come back in, and it is expected to be the fastest growing contributor to the overall electricity cost. We've also got other support mechanisms like the climate change levy in the sort of gold colour there, and just beneath it in the pink, the capacity market. So the capacity market funds what we would call capacity providers that kick in during peaks of demand in the winter, just to kind of cover over small periods of time where there's not enough electricity in the grid. Now, because they are a very reactive, responsive service, they tend to charge a lot more for the energy, the electricity that they generate than some of the other gensets that you might have on the system. But as a manufacturer, there is an opportunity for you to use this to make money rather than just be paying out for it. And again, we'll sort of touch on that later. One other line item to kind of keep an eye on is green gas levy. Now, at the moment, this is only a small contributor to your overall utilities budget. This is funding the conversion of the gas networks to accept more bio methane, so typically from sewage or anaerobic digestion from agriculture, sort of waste crops that are sort of decomposing, and we capture the gas. One thing that is missing from here, because we don't have the numbers to model, is the cost of funding hydrogen. And government is expecting to put an awful lot of money into hydrogen, but that has to be paid for. And we are expecting, though I don't have confirmation of it, that some of this cost will be collected from the consumer via your gas bills. So that is something to kind of watch out for. But if you want to talk more about sort of specifics on costs, please get in touch with me afterwards. The important thing for today is kind of how is all of this going to really impact you? And like I said at the start, we said we'd do this back in February, thinking that, the energy crisis might have started to settle down and government would have kind of got back to business after all of the shenanigans that the Tory party put us through sort of before Christmas, and we'd start to have some more firm policy. That hasn't happened. So there's not much out there right now. What you have access to if you take the Make UK Net Zero Toolkit or are an inspired client is our funding schemes guide. I'll just kind of move this onto the screen that you can see so I can sort of flick through it a little. We produce one of these every quarter. Like I said, if you use our Net Zero Toolkit or you're an inspired client, you're entitled to have a copy, and I'll make sure that that is available. This was produced yesterday, so it's hot off the press, and it covers kind of different funding schemes in industry, public sector, residential, and then we kind of work our way around the country for sort of funds that are applicable to small and medium enterprises. There tends to be a lot more at small level, but it's very, very regional, specific to kind of different cities, and explain kind of what's out there and how you can go and get it. Now, for industry, there's really only the two that are on the screen: the Green Heat Network Fund and the Low Carbon Manufacturing Challenge Fund in Scotland. The Scottish one is temporarily paused for new inquiries, and the Green Heat Network Fund actually closes on Friday. If you do have a heat network, if anything in your manufacturing portfolio is providing heat into a district heating scheme, and you're not already aware of this or would like to provide heat into a district heating scheme, again, sort of let us know. This round closes on Friday, but these come along quite frequently. Heat networks is another area that government is really, really keen to see investment. I'm just going to move that off the screen. It's a little bit clunky, so apologies. What is out there that's probably of more interest, and something kind of that I think everyone should keep an eye on is hydrogen. Now, like I said, government has a lot of ambition for hydrogen. In particular, they want to see 10 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen production by 2030. But this is only going to happen if the hydrogen producers have someone that's going to buy their hydrogen. Industry is expected to account for a lot of that. There have been in recent years funding for fuel switching through a hydrogen accelerator and an industrial fuel switching scheme. These are actually both currently closed, and pretty much everyone that's involved with hydrogen is waiting on the publication of a low carbon hydrogen agreement, which kind of set out heads of terms for how some of these arrangements might work. That still hasn't come out. Hopefully we'll see it before the end of the summer. Government is really committing to H2, to hydrogen development, and Scotland in particular. The Scottish government has stated very strongly that they want Scotland to become world leaders in hydrogen and kind of replace the North Sea oil and gas economy with a hydrogen economy partially. The Department for Energy Security and Net Zero has committed 9 billion of investment into hydrogen, and like I said, we are expecting this to be paid for in part, if not in totality, by levies on our gas bills. So if you are not engaging in degasification, in heat decarbonisation, and in moving away from gas for operational processes already, it's a really, really good time to start looking at that and looking at your processes and find out what you can do. And Sandy will talk to you about kind of R&D support to help you with various projects like that. Another thing to be aware of, there's actually a whole review of the electricity markets going on. So I mentioned when we had the graphs up on the screen showing what costs have done, that we're expecting wholesale to change. An initial consultation was run by government last year on changes to the electricity market, and it covered sort of wholesale markets, low carbon generation, flexibility and capacity, and then looked a little bit at kind of national grid and system operability. But one of the biggest proposals in this is whether government should consider splitting the wholesale market up and moving to more kind of location-based pricing. They've got kind of two things that they're looking at, zonal and nodal. And nodal pricing means that you would get different prices for different locations on the transmission grid, and these locations would be called nodes. The reason for doing that is that in some parts of the country, it's much easier to generate energy electricity, and in other parts of the country it's very difficult to generate electricity, and so there's a cost differential moving things from one to the other. We don't really see that at the moment. We have a much more socialized approach at the moment, where it kind of goes on to the central market, and wholesale wise we all sort of pay the same. But the advantage of that nodal pricing is it encourages generators and flexibility providers, and as a manufacturing unit you can almost certainly be a flexibility provider, to locate and operate assets where they are most needed. The downside is that it's going to make the electricity markets a lot more complicated. And if you're in the wrong part of the UK, wrong being kind of where the grids are most constrained, you could see that that starts to really impact the business model for where your manufacturing sites are located. Now, we don't have much more information on sort of, which areas are likely to be preferable for new developments versus others, but it is a very long-term thinking policy. It's something that is going to cause short-term pain for long-term gain, and over time the hope is that it leads to more efficient location of resources, and therefore kind of rewarding innovation and development of flexibility. So as an end user, it means that if you are in a constrained asset, a constrained area of the networks, the looking at demand side flexibility is, I would say, no longer optional. It's something that every manufacturing body ought to be doing. What is demand side flexibility? In short, it's looking at when you use energy and being able to modulate up and down the amount of electricity that you're taking from the grid in response to how expensive that electricity is at that time of day. Now, although this has always been kind of targeted at the industrial sector, it's ironically the residential sector where this is getting the most take up at the moment, and we see particularly some of the newer energy suppliers, not so much what we would have used to call the big six, although there aren't six of them anymore, but some of the newer brands are really kind of promoting, turn your electricity off at home in the early evening and you will save money. You've probably seen noise on social media or articles in the papers around that. But you can do this at an industrial scale as well. By optimizing and incentivizing this sort of flexibility, it means that is a bit more kind of thought needs to go into your energy management strategy, but there's also a lot of opportunity. So if you can take control of when you use energy, you can both avoid the most expensive times of day, but you can also earn revenue by contributing to that capacity market that I mentioned earlier with the graph kind of going, the bar chart going upwards, the capacity market being the bit that kicks in when the grid is under a strain. It needs a bit of extra supply, and it tends to pay quite well. So I would really recommend, if you've not looked at demand response before, do so sort of over the next few years, and keep an eye on what's happening with REMA, the review of the electricity markets. We will keep you informed through our relationship with Make UK as well, because changes to that and promotion of the capacity market is likely to really incentivise investment there. Another way that you might want to consider kind of getting control of your energy budgets a little bit is through power purchase agreements, known as a PPA. These offer the ability to enter into a long-term contract direct with typically a renewable generator. Usually these contracts would be kind of 10 to 15 years the shortest that you tend to get them is sort of 77 years. It's rare to find contracts that are shorter than that, so it is long-term thinking. But what's good about this is they tend to only increase in relation to CPI or RPI, whichever is agreed at the time. So it gives you real control over budget planning. Not necessarily always the cheapest way to buy electricity, although with what the market has been doing lately, that has probably changed, and it probably is quite attractive right from the start. But what it's really, really good for is that long-term cost stabilization, because you know what you're going to pay for a long time. You can do that either kind of virtually, where you still get all of your electricity through the grid. It's all billed by your supplier, so it doesn't kind of feel any different from an end user perspective or from a kind of financial management perspective. It's all the paperwork is kind of broadly the same every month, but you have this agreement that sort of sits behind it to sleeve direct from a wind farm or whatever you've kind of selected to your supplier, and your supplier kind of passes it straight on at the cost that's been agreed. You can also do what we call private wire. And this is really good if you are looking at on-site generation, so putting in your own generation on your own land, but you can't afford the capex. Private wire usually offers savings because you haven't got grid charges, so you're not paying any of that stuff that was in the bar chart graph, any of those kind of things. And it provides the generator with security that it is going to have a buyer. Private wire normally below retail cost of grid electricity, but again, they do tend to be long-term contracts, and you might not necessarily want the idea of kind of someone operating plant on your land that you're not really in control of. It is worth looking at and talking about with whomever looks after your buildings. Before I go, there's two things I just want to remind people of, sort of whilst I'm here. ESOS phase 3 deadline is approaching. Hopefully, if this applies to you, you know about it. But basically, if your business employs 250 people or more, and or has a turnover in excess of 44 million, balance sheet over 38 million, you have to do energy audits every year. The Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, you need to provide kind of annual reports to government, and the deadline for that is the 5th of December. The other thing that I wanted to touch on, because I think it's super, super important for this sector, is the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which the EU have introduced. I've not been booked to talk about this. We're talking more on the energy side, but this has been done by the EU in response to the US's Inflation Reduction Act. And basically it requires anyone who's importing stuff to pay a carbon import levy for goods that originate from any country that doesn't have a carbon pricing regime, which for a lot of you, I would imagine you've got a fair bit of that in your supply chain. So that's an EU thing, but not to be outdone, His Majesty's Treasury and the Department for Energy Security have published a policy on various measures to reduce carbon leakage, which is where manufacturing moves offshore, so that it's not, they're still generating the same amount of carbon, but it's just not within the UK. This consultation is open at the moment, and it does include proposals for a UK carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM. The proposals are very similar in design to the EU one, so I wouldn't discount them linking in future. It would affect, if it came in, a limited number of sectors. I'm not going to read them out, but those sectors are on the screen now, although the EU scheme will apply eventually to every sector covered by the EU ETS. So if you are a UK emissions trading scheme participant, you should definitely be paying attention to this. The earliest we expect it to take effect would be 2026, but there could be some reporting requirements a lot sooner. So make sure that you know your supply chain, you know where you are sourcing raw materials, and if you are likely to have kind of any risk of these carbon import levies being slapped on what you're buying, that you're looking at more local or European, US alternatives, and weigh that up. It's not just about CBAM, this policy, it's also looking at things like product standards, so having kind of upper limit on embodied emissions for individual products that are sold or produced in the UK. So that need for knowing your life cycle carbon emissions becomes a lot more important. So again, probably something worth thinking about looking at, and demand side policies to grow the market for low carbon products, including product labeling. So just like we have food labeling, we'd have climate labeling on all of our products, and changing public procurement guidelines to prioritize low carbon products, and also encouraging private procurement to have similar kind of guidelines in place. I don't know how that will work in practice, because obviously it's harder to legislate private procurement than it is government spend. But this consultation is open until the end of June, 22nd of June, and we will likely be responding to it. So if anyone wants to talk about it, get in touch. That's everything from me. Thank you very much for staying with us. Copies of everything that I've mentioned are available on the icon module in our client portal, or via the Make UK Net Zero Toolkit. Alternatively, you can get in touch with us at makeuk@inspiredenergy.co.uk. So that's everything from myself, and I can pass back to you, Brigitte.
Yes, thank you very much, Georgina. That was really interesting, and I really do hope that our participants do look into those new things. There's a lot happening. I also want to mention very quickly in passing the Energy Efficiency Task Force, which has been set up in March by the government, and which will be publishing a first plan for energy efficiency, where I think they have 6 billion of funding for that. So a plan launched in June, mid-June. So we'll have to look out for that. We've been participating actively, and there are a number of proposals as well, as for example, making a condition for lending to have the ISO 50001. I'm sure Martin will explain this to us. It's on energy management, and many others as well. They're proposing to fund an energy efficiency accelerator for both well, for smaller companies and also for energy intensive industries. So we need to watch out for that and let you know, but there's a lot coming through. So then, Sandy, I'll pass on to you, Sandy from Visiative. You'll talk to us about how to fund your net journey, a zero journey through grants and tax credits.
That's great. Thanks very much, Brigitte. Morning, everybody. Sandy Finlay here from Visiative, and I'm just going to try and share my screen with you. There we go. Can everybody see that on the screen now? Yeah. Brigitte has asked me this morning to spend some time talking about funding for net zero projects. I'm going to spend some time looking at grant funding, talk briefly about R&D tax relief, and then finish off on capital allowances, because they're all equally as important. That's who we are. Visiative, we're an international consulting group. We help our clients accelerate innovation activity by supporting the adoption of winning IP strategies identifying and securing appropriate forms of funding, and we also help with deploying digitalization solutions for design and manufacturing. So that's who we are. Start off with the grant funding. We obviously provide a full range of services in terms of grants. So we help clients source grants, we write grant applications, and we also administer grant-funded projects through the life cycle for clients. One of the things I would say about grant funding is that there are general grant funds available. So things like Innovate Smart Fund, but there are also specific grant funds which are much more focused on particular industry sectors or particular challenges. Our own experience is that general funds such as Smart Fund are always oversubscribed. The last few rounds, Smart Fund has been oversubscribed by about 4 or 5 times. And even the projects which are scoring high in due diligence are really struggling to get funding. So if you can, you want to try and make your grant applications much more specific. Innovate UK run a series of grants which changes on a weekly and fortnightly basis. And what I would say is that when you're planning projects, always go back to Innovate UK's website and look at the current projects. If it was me, I'd be looking at least every 2 weeks because they do change quite frequently. What I did on Friday was I went through the competitions list as it is just now, and I picked out all of the ones that were net zero related. Now, not all of these will be appropriate to your business or to your projects, but it's interesting to have a look at what's already available. I can give you some pointers on these, and I can also tell you where some of the previous competitions have been as well. So the Net Zero Living Digital Accelerator, that's really about encouraging companies to use big data to drive developments that will address one of the big net zero challenges. So those tend to be around power, heat, and mobility. And they're offering grants of between 150,000 and 300,000 to support projects. If you're looking for £150,000 grant, that's got to be match funded. So your project would need to be about £300,000. And they are generally looking for one company to be the lead in the project, so claiming the grant or submitting the application for the grant, and to have the involvement of at least one customer or one product user during the project. That's really to ensure that there's an easy route to commercialization if the development's successful. Net Zero Heat Design Engineering Innovation Lab, it's less about getting grant money, it's much more about bringing together companies who can have discussions. So it's a discussion group forum to discuss projects that are driven at heat building upgrades. So you might be a company who actually are involved in something like HVAC. You may be a company who has issues with heating in their current premises. Innovate UK are looking to facilitate working groups and discussion groups to address real life challenges or situations and real life solutions or solutions tailored for specific companies' needs. The Small Business Research Innovation Fund has a £2 million fund. And again, it's looking to specifically support projects that can reduce the emissions from either domestic burning or agricultural practices. Now, you wouldn't have to be a company involved in agriculture. You could be a company designing technology or building machinery or equipment, or you could be the designer of industrial incinerators for the domestic use to access that funding. What I would say is that all of these projects that I looked at on Friday are all closing in the next 2 weeks. So the Net Zero Digital Accelerator closes next week. The Net Zero Heat Innovation Lab, it closes next week. The SBRI actually closes in 2 days' time. The Net Zero Hydrogen Fund closes, and well, round 1 closes 2 weeks' time, and round 2 closes next week. That project's really about providing companies with funds to support either the development costs for designing low carbon hydrogen production processes, or the second round is supporting the CapEx costs of buying low carbon hydrogen production equipment and implementing the systems. And then the final one, the novel low emission food production systems, is more of an investor partnership. So what they've done is they've come along and said, right, we have a pot of money here. If a company is looking to raise funding to put in place and implement a new food production system, which is resource efficient or reduces emissions from food processing and food production, we can provide 30% of the funds as long as the applying company is looking to raise private funding for the balance. So it's one of these investor accelerator programs. If we put in 30%, it should make it easier for the company to go out and raise the additional funding it requires for the project. What I would say about all of these is they are very specific, but you generally find you have a higher chance of success if you can match your project to a particular innovation fund competition where there's a twinning of the technology you're looking to develop or the industrial application of that technology if it's successful. Okay, so I would advise you to look at that on a weekly basis. There is on this slide that I'm just putting up, I actually put the link in for the the Innovate UK competitions page because it's difficult to find it sometimes on Innovate UK's website. But if you click on that second last bullet point there, that will take you straight to the current competitions, and you want to be looking at that regularly if you can. A couple of other things I wanted to mention in relation to grant funding. The Made Smarter initiative, now it doesn't work across the whole of the UK. It works down as far as the south of the West Midlands, I believe. So if you're from West Midlands upwards, you can actually access Made Smarter initiative, and it gives you free access to expert advice on identifying projects that will automate or digitalize part of the manufacturing process. And again, the interesting thing is there, if you work with Made Smarter on identifying suitable projects, you can then receive grant funding to support the implementation phase. So it is worthwhile making contact with Made Smarter in the early stages, because it can reduce some of your upfront costs in identifying and designing a project, and then there's funding for the implementation. The Made Smarter Sustainability Accelerator, this is a new project that Innovate UK have set up, and it looks to encourage companies to, again, apply big data to manufacturing issues or challenges where the application of big data could reduce carbon emissions. Now, they are at the moment looking for individual companies to apply for funding, but I know from personal experience, I was involved in a discussion group in February where there was an issue raised in the galvanizing sector, and when they raised it, I recognised that there was a similar problem affecting all aerosol manufacturers in the UK. So I've actually introduced Made Smarter Sustainability Accelerator to the British aerosol manufacturers, and they're now talking about doing an industry-wide project to apply big data to a specific solution they have with maintaining temperature, water temperatures in testing baths. And it could significantly reduce carbon emissions in the aerosol industry. So it's worthwhile being aware of these because, again, they don't provide a lot of upfront cash, but they do provide good expertise, and that could reduce some of your costs. The other thing to be aware of in terms of grant funding is local funding initiatives. So I've put a link there which takes you to a website that actually looks at what funding is available for net zero projects in various regions across England and Wales. It's worthwhile having a look at. The one thing I would say is that local funding tends to be smaller amounts of money, It's generally easier to access. And again, there can be more funding, more support for CapEx costs in there. So some regions in England still have access to European regional development funds, which can be used to support projects that will safeguard existing jobs or create new jobs. And you can often tie CapEx projects into that safeguarding existing jobs criteria. That money will go at the end of this year for definite, but while it's there, make best use of it. If you want to access local funding initiatives and you can't find them on that link there, it's worth talking to your local enterprise partnership or to your growth hub in your area. They will generally have a much better knowledge than I will of what's available in the various regions in England. In terms of R&D tax relief, most of us already know about this. I don't necessarily want to go through the scheme. What I want to say is that companies have to be aware, you may have been claiming R&D tax relief for a number of years. It's worthwhile remembering that from our experience, the majority of eligible R&D spend for our clients now comes from process innovation projects rather than new product development projects. So when you buy new technologies, when you try to implement them, when you integrate them into existing workflows or process lines, there are often technical challenges and problems. That's where your R&D eligibility comes in. So when you're looking at net zero projects, when you're looking at buying and implementing new equipment, whether it's automation projects or digitalization projects, be aware of where the challenges are. And if you have to, speak to an R&D specialist and find out if they believe there's eligibility in that work for R&D tax relief. The relief rates are certainly falling at the moment. We all know the changes HMRC and the government have made in the last 6 months, but I think you'll all agree that 21% return on or tax relief on your eligible spend is still better than nothing. And that's generally what you can get R&D tax relief on. The biggest areas, those are the top 3 bits of the qualifying criteria. You need to hit all of those 3. And HMRC are becoming much more stringent in assessing R&D claims now and knocking them back if you don't tick the boxes in all 3 criteria. And the eligible costs are generally staffing costs, raw materials, software, and externally provided workers and subcontractors. Again, if you're building a first off a prototype plant, there are often subsidies available or reliefs available for part of the CapEx cost. So it's worth making yourself aware of that. If you're building a new processing plant to reduce power consumption, to reduce emissions, then elements of the CapEx cost in there will qualify for relief. And finally, I just want to talk about capital allowances. We know that the super enhancement of 130% has gone by the board at the end of March. One thing I would say is that any CapEx you've made between 1st of April 21 and 31st of March 23 will qualify for 130% or relief against 130% of the cost. If you haven't done that already, get onto your tax advisor, get onto your accountant and get those claims made. You can still make a retrospective claim at the moment on CapEx costs for those 2 previous years. The good thing that HMRC and the government have done is that from 1st of April, they've introduced full expensing in the first year for all general pool plant and equipment investment. So as manufacturers, any new equipment, any new plant you're buying, you will get full relief against the full cost in the year of acquisition. And that's over and above your £1 million annual investment allowance. So again, you really want to be on board with somebody who knows about capital allowances, your tax advisor, your accountant if they're up on capital allowances. If not, seek specialist advice and make sure you're maximising the value of the capital allowances relief for the business. And that's really it. You might want to keep questions till the end, Annette.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Sandy. Sorry, they're really interesting. So I've let it run because I think there's a wealth of information there, really useful. So without ado, Martin, please, it's your turn now. Thank you. Are you on mute, Martin?
That's better. Sorry, Brigitte. Really interesting this morning when you all came in and completed the pre-presentation poll. What we saw there was people sort of answering, those who took the time to answer. How far along the road were you with your net zero journey? And 19% of the respondents said you hadn't started, and 46 of you said you started, but you didn't have or didn't know where to get support from. And question 2 and 3 of our presentation poll also said that, well, 58% of you said that your journey had stalled. Now, that was either down to a lack or difficulty to get funding, which our previous sort of speakers this morning have spoken about, but also a lack of skills or knowledge of where to get started. And hopefully we at Make UK can help you in this and give you some sustainability support, not only in our consultancy side of what we do, but also our training side. And I just want to take a few minutes to sort of make you aware of the offerings that we've got. When it comes to professional enhancement and advancement, we have, of course, we're partnered with IEMA. We have IEMA's courses, AIEMA, PIEMA, and also the diploma in sustainable business practice. But we can also offer lead auditor training to an IRCA standard for those people within your organization or your business that require that. But when it comes to your workforce, your managers and your employees, we can offer an awful lot more. We have a full set of IEMA courses, ranging from awareness all the way through managers and your workforce, and also senior managers with IEMA's Leading with Environmental Sustainability course, which is akin to what IOSH did with their Leading Safely. It gives leaders within organizations an idea about what environmental sustainability is all about. We can also support you and your organizations with internal auditors to a 14001 standard, and also getting to know about waste management and what you need to know about handling waste. And you might sort of think, well, what's that going to do with net zero? You'd be surprised. It has a very big impact when it comes to net zero, how much waste you generate and what sort of waste it is you're generating. We also have 2 offerings which are sort of aimed at your workforce, making them aware of the 2 ISO standards, ISO 14001 and ISO 50001. Both of these courses around a day's worth of delivery. And it's really interesting what Georgina said earlier about ESOS and the deadline coming up for ESOS. If you are 50001 accredited, you don't need ESOS, and an awful lot of organizations I've been talking to recently are going down the 50001 route rather than down the ESOS route, because they can see that year on year it has a benefit within their business, and also has a benefit in their overall management system and helping people to save energy rather than just doing something about it when the need arises. 2 courses aimed specifically at net zero are the IEMA Pathway to Net Zero, a 2-day course, which has proved successful since its launch around May, June time last year. We've had an awful lot of interest in the Pathways to Net Zero course from an awful lot of organizations and individuals about what this is. What this course does is hopefully highlight and make you realize what there is out there. And here at Make UK, again, under the IEMA sort of banner, we offer this training to anybody who wants to come along and sort of start to pick their pathway to net zero and sort of help them to sort of understand what's required. We've also got IEMA's Introduction to Net Zero, which is really a 2-hour offering introducing net zero to managers, supervisors, employees, and even the boardroom. And one of the things that we are doing in the next couple of months is launching that as a new learning offering over our learner management system. As far as consultancy goes, well, a whole host of environmental consultancy covering a wide range of environmental aspects, including legal compliance, aspects and impacts, of course, and also a gap analysis as to where you're actually at, including ESG reviews and reports, which is something that is really coming to the fore now that that has particularly changed. We also offer interim support for companies who require that a little bit more, a little bit extra, and don't have a person actually appointed. And we're also offering general net zero support from strategy, also compliance and systems. Our existing EHS members and membership already get advice and guidance on specific issues, and also the 2 yearly updates. The yearly updates we offer in May and in October will also help you along. Virtual meetings, of course, we can do to sort of talk to you about how we can support you and your sustainability agenda, including net zero. And working, as Georgina highlighted, our partner company, Inspired Energy, we offer energy audits and help with energy management. All of this is available to you, and I don't know how many of you actually realize that here at Make UK we can offer you all that. We have consultants who will visit you, we have consultants who will talk to you about all your needs, and it's really important that, like I say, you know where to come, because if you started but then your net zero strategy is stalled for one reason or another, I'd hate to think it was because you didn't know where to come to get the support and advice that you actually need. If you want a little bit more advice, then please scan the QR code here, or it'll be available as part of the slide set that you'll get following this webinar. Or you can call us, or email us at inquiries@makeuk.org. Hopefully that's been beneficial to you all. If it has, great. If you knew about what we did, even better. But equally, we're here to help. Back to you, Bridget.
Thanks, Martin. That was really very comprehensive. There's a number of things I didn't know you were doing either. So, but I do recommend some of the courses. They are absolutely excellent, and they are practical as well. So without ado, I think we have covered the other funding avenues, unless Sandy, I think we have done that. We've spoken about Made Smarter. And of course, we have a regional membership team in each of the regions where you are. So don't hesitate to, go to them as well for any inquiry. So we'll just go forward now with the poll before we do our Q&A. So if you can quickly answer, and I see that these 5 questions, which should be very easy to answer. One is whether the meeting met your expectations, whether you'd like either Martin or Inspired or Initiative to contact you with more information about how they can support you. So I'll just let you answer, give you another minute or half minute.
Whilst we do this, we can just check if there are any questions. Anybody?
Yeah, and right, yeah, exactly.
Got the panel in front of you. Everybody's gone very polite and quiet now.
Great, yes, the Make UK Green Network, that's good. Right, so I think I'll just share the results, shall I, very quickly. That's mainly for us internally. So yeah, there's a few of you, so certainly we'll get back to you on that, on your inquiries, and thanks for your interest in the Green Network. It goes both ways. We'll be asking sometimes for your opinion and questions quickly. Sometimes it's a quick poll for consultations and things like that, and also some information. Right, so I'll stop sharing on this. And any questions, Q&A? No. It seems like we've done a good job.
Don't be shy.
No, don't be shy, because really your feedback, as I said in the introduction, is so precious, and any concerns, and you shouldn't be embarrassed. On the contrary, they help us define what your problems are, and then we can feed back and and try and find solutions for them. Well, if there's no one, I think we just need to close then. So it's just left for me to thank our speakers, Georgina, Sandy, and Martin, for their expertise today, and we will continue to partner with them for their specialist expertise. Thank you all very much for attending and asking questions and for your interest. We'll be sending out all the information from today's event, and I just wish you to have an excellent rest of the day.
Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. I'm just going to stop the recording. Stop recording.
Oh, great.